I have now great pleasure in introducing Terry Stock. We started working with Rolls-Royce Marine just over 2 years ago. When we presented the initial findings of our first set of interviews, Terry was one of the sponsors who was present at that Reflect Back workshop. And he made that amazing link that people occasionally, rarely do, which is a leap of the imagination, and actually considered the possibility of involving the high flyers, the accelerated leadership development team in the project. So what Terry will tell you about is that process that we went through. Just to tell you a little about Terry, Terry is Director of Human Resources at Rolls-Royce Marine, but before that he has had 20 years experience internationally in human resources, and he has held 2 senior HR positions with Johnson Matthey PLC and with the Cookson Group PLC. He joined Rolls-Royce in December 2000 as Director of HR Marine. And I will now ask Terry to take us through the presentation. Actually, one more little thing. For those of you who want to discuss the complexity theory issues, we will not have time at this first hour, but there is a parallel session scheduled at 12:15 that we will be following on, and that is when those of you who, as I said, want to discuss very much the theoretical issues would be very welcome to do that and continue the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Eve. Am I switched on? Okay. Am I turned on? Am I tuned in? That remains to be seen. I'll let you be the judge of that. Well, this slide is intended to dispel the myth, really, the myth that Rolls-Royce is about motor cars. As you can see from this, we don't do motor cars anymore. We sold that to a small German firm a few years ago before I joined Rolls-Royce, so I had nothing to do with that. My mother still thinks that Rolls-Royce makes motor cars, and that kind of keeps our relationship fairly simple. So I'm pleased that she's not here, because she'd hate to discover that I don't work for that marvellous company that makes the marvellous motor cars. So anyway, you all know that the Rolls-Royce that I'm talking about is into aerospace, into marine, which is the bit that I work for, and we're into energy as well. You can find out more from the Rolls-Royce website if you care to visit it. Now, I hope you're not expecting this to be simple. Complexity is quite complex. I've tried to make it as simple as I can, but that's the topic, dealing with issues of complexity and cultural diversity in Rolls-Royce Marine. I'm going to get a stiff neck here, keep looking up there, I think, but let's see how we go. That's what I'm going to talk about, or what we're going to talk about, because I'm sure Eve will contribute at some stage, certainly towards the end anyway. And I'm going to talk about a project that Rolls-Royce Marine embarked upon with the London School of Economics Complexity Group. I'm going to talk about the difference that the LSE and the project has made within the company. And I'm going to give you some context about Rolls-Royce Marine. I'll tell you a little bit about the business, because I think you need to understand a little bit so that you can appreciate the value of the project. I'll tell you a bit about the process that we followed and the tools and methodology that we used. And I'll also tell you what the outcomes were and what we're now doing with those outcomes in the business. So first of all, I guess that the key point to make is that the work that we did with the LSE has been successful, and that can be demonstrated by what I refer to as 12 work streams that are now being implemented within the business. These are 12 discrete work streams. They're significant. They're not all sort of pinko personnel, soft and fluffy things, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those later on. They're quite hard, and they include things like determining a very clear product development process and identifying business synergies. So they're really quite hard. There are one or two that are pink and fluffy, but most of them are fairly hard. And another thing that the project did for us was that it helped to dispel the myth that national cultural diversity was a problem. That the conventional wisdom when I joined the company was that there was a problem between the Norwegians, the Swedes, the Finns, the Brits and the Americans, that it was all very difficult to work together because we were all from different national cultural backgrounds. And there are differences, but we've managed to dispel the myth that in fact it's a problem. And quite the opposite now, we believe that it's a strength. The cultural diversity that we've got is a strength. And the project contributed to the dispelling of that myth. The LSE Complexity Group specifically brought a number of things. They brought academic rigor and a methodology and analytical tools to the project. And I think this is important because often in industry, some of you probably see this, often in industry there's a temptation, there's a lot of pressure to jump directly from the problem to a solution on an intuitive basis. And often that can be effective. People with lots of experience can do that. But sometimes, and I think particularly with very complex organizational and social issues within an organization, that doesn't quite work. So the academic rigor, the methodology, the tools and techniques and the analysis were very helpful in keeping us on track and enabling us to present a good case to the senior management that was backed up by evidence, backed up by analysis, and to enable us to get these 12 work streams effected within the business. Complexity thinking, the LSE brought that to the party. This gave us a language and, if you like, a sort of theoretical reference point that was used during the project. And final point on this slide, the project helped us to achieve within the organization a change in emphasis. We had been concentrating on structural change, looking at moving the pieces around the organization to make it move better, to make it work better, to make it work more effectively. The change in emphasis was to go away from that kind of philosophy much more to one that concentrates on the relationships between the various entities. So we focus much more now on relationships between people, between different organizational units, and between different countries. So we're much more network and relationship focused. Now, I think it's useful at this point. I'm going to give you sort of 7 slides that I'll go through fairly quickly just to give you a flavour of some of the issues that we're talking about, and I'll then go into a little bit more detail. So I'll go reasonably quickly through this. So what I'd like to do is give you an insight into what I mean by issues of complexity and cultural diversity. Well, it's when you think your organisation looks like this, and this is, of course, pretty simple. There are customer-facing business units, there are operational business units. We call them CFBUs and OBUs, of course, because we have to use acronyms, don't we? And we have functional management over here that does its bit as well. And this is my beautiful organisation. It's a matrix organisation with operational business units making things and customer-facing business units working with the customer and being supplied by the operational units. So that's what you think your organisation looks like, but then your people tell you that it feels a bit like this. This is the Norwegian view of a matrix organisation. Get me out of here, you know, I feel trapped, I can't move. That's what they feel that it's like. And it's also a bit like this, with the Brits, the Norwegians, the Finns and the Swedes all going in different directions. And maybe these are corporate seagulls swooping around, and we all know what corporate seagulls do. But I'm too polite to mention it in this company. So you start to get messages that actually your beautiful, simple organisation isn't really that beautiful or that simple. And you take a look. You take a look at your organisation, and you discover that, in fact, it looks more like this, with a whole bunch of complex interactions between various units within the organisation and without the organisation. And somehow or other that results in a product or a service being delivered to the customers. This is a simple supply chain analysis that illustrates some of the complexity that we've got. And also you do some other analysis and you discover that your organisation could be represented by a diagram that looks a bit like this. This is a communication pattern diagram based on email traffic around the organisation. And some of you people communicate like this. This is how the Finns communicate. Any Finns in the audience? Good. And if they were here, you wouldn't know it, because they wouldn't have said anything anyway. They tend not to say very much, the Finns. They would be shrinking at the back now. They say not very much, and then they say less and less and less and less, searching for clarity through increasing succinctness. That's the way the Finns communicate. And then, of course, there's the Americans, who have a lot more to say. They like to get it all out on the table, and the way that they search for clarity is to say more and more and to say it louder and louder. And eventually they get there, but quite different to the Finns. It's always quite interesting to put Finns and Americans together at dinner parties, I find. And then, of course, the Italians turn up about 30 minutes late, which is even more fun. And then we've got Swedes as well. That's the way that Swedes like to communicate. They say quite a bit, but they like to get consensus, so they tend to have lots of debate and consensus seeking, and that can make the process very, very slow. The Finns like to get on with it, as do the Americans, and indeed the Norwegians. So that's the way the Swedes do it, and they're all quite different. And then, of course, there are others who won't communicate very exactly, but they'll expect you to kind of know what they mean, and I'm talking there about the Brits, of course, and we use this thing called coded speech, where we say, that's a very interesting idea, and we don't really mean it. And I'll get back to you on that. Of course, we never do. We must look further at this. Of course, we never do that either. So these are some slightly extreme examples, but I hope that you get the picture. So when you have all of this, then I think you have issues of complexity and cultural diversity. And that, in the context of Rolls-Royce Marine, that's what I'm talking about, is organizational stuff and cultural stuff. And every company has some of this, I'm sure, some more than others. And I'm not claiming that Rolls-Royce Marine has more than any other company. We certainly have less than Ford or British Petroleum or British Telecom, some of those very large companies. But we do have some of this, and it does cause us some issues, and we have to deal with them. So I hope that little run-through of those 7 or 8 slides has given you a little bit of a flavour for what I'm going to talk about. But I'd like now to just give you some context and background, starting with a little bit about Rolls-Royce Marine. We are now the world leader in marine propulsion. We are quite large in terms of revenues and people. We have world leadership in a number of our chosen markets. And we have some world-class capabilities. We're also quite international, manufacturing, as you can see, in a number of countries. We're looking at manufacturing in places like China now, and we have sales and service offices in 35 countries. So that gives you a little picture of us, 7,500 people, quite a lot of customers, and £1 billion turnover. And we can claim to have been quite successful. If you look at the sales, which is the grey area, and then the underlying PBIT, which is the profit before interest and tax, which is the sort of yellow area at the top, you can see that we've achieved quite good growth over the 3 years that are represented there. So the business is good, and 2003 is looking good as well, and we're building on successful and solid foundations. But to understand why it's complex and why it's diverse, the history is important. And in fact, before 2000, this was a very different business altogether. So what I'd like to do is just explain a little bit of the history to you. We are today, the business today that is the world leader in marine propulsion. This £1 billion business is the product of 2 very different businesses. Before 2000, Rolls-Royce Marine was just a naval business. I say just a naval business, it was a significant business, but it was only in naval markets, and it had a very limited product range, which was principally gas turbine engines and nuclear steam raising plant, okay, the core of a nuclear submarine, the propulsion system. And that was essentially it. And then in November 1999, Rolls-Royce Marine acquired the Vickers-Ulstein Marine business, and it was transformed into a very different business with this balanced portfolio, and the acquisition gave us access to commercial markets. So we had full marine market reach. So Rolls-Royce was the traditional naval business, and the Vickers-Ullstein acquisition in November 1999 brought the commercial side of the business. And the acquisition of Vickers-Ullstein was a key enabler of our business strategy. This attempts to show that in 1999 we were just in the naval markets, as I've explained, surface ships, engines for surface ships, naval surface ships and submarines. And then in 2000 you can see how big we were with the addition of the merchant and offshore sectors of commercial marine, and you can see how that has grown up to 2002. So the merchant offshore, which is the main elements of the commercial side of the business, is now very, very significant, as this illustrates. And also, as I mentioned, the product range has increased, so that now we have a whole bunch of things that we do, from the gas turbines and nuclear propulsion stuff that I mentioned, through a whole range of other things like pods and rudders and steering gear, winches and cable handling machinery. We have diesels, diesel engines, we have water jets, we have all sorts of things, motion control, software, and so it goes on. So we've got a lot of things, and these are just well-known product names, Aquamaster, Brown Brothers. I guess they'll not be familiar to you, but they're brands that have a great reputation in the marine world. And as well as the vast range of products, we also acquired a lot more people, and we acquired them principally in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Poland, Korea, places like that. And this shows where we are now. As you can see, in the UK we have about 3,000 people, and we have about 4,000 outside of the UK. So we can claim to be quite international. But as you can see, a lot of that in the Nordic countries. And what we had acquired, as I've said, is a very different business to the old Rolls-Royce naval business, very different, with very different cultures, business cultures and national cultures. And I think that's where the complexity really begins. And I'll just spend a few moments on this, because from a complexity point of view, and in terms of where the issues for us arose, the acquisition brought with it 2,000 customers. In the Rolls-Royce naval business, there were maybe 10, 15, 20 customers. There aren't that many navies in the world. And as far as the submarine business is concerned, we only serve the UK MOD. So relatively small number of customers, and all of a sudden we acquire another 2,000 customers. So that's a degree of complexity that has not been there before. We acquired, as I've mentioned, hundreds of products, literally. We acquired also a business and a market that requires very fast lead times in the commercial world. The customer rings up, says he would like it at the end of the week, in extremis. At the other end of the spectrum, there are those that give you quite long sight lines, and some of the projects do run into years. But in general, it's a very fast lead time business, whereas the naval business, you can be seeing projects 5, 10, 15 years ahead. And the contract that you secure may, in the case of the nuclear business, run for up to 40 years. So very different businesses from that point of view. Commercial quality standards, you have to build a naval engine to a different standard to an engine for a cruise liner, for, I guess, obvious reasons, but I'll state it anyway. Naval vessels tend, from time to time, to get blown up or to get shelled. They have to be shock resistant. There are other operational requirements as well. They chug along gently for long periods, and then they have to go very, very fast for short spells, typically. So there are different operating requirements and quality standards that apply to the businesses. We acquired a very international business, whereas the Rolls-Royce business was principally UK, but with some US people and customers. And we acquired very different national cultures, as I've already mentioned. Another difference was that we acquired, with the Ullstein group, a privately owned culture. The Ullstein group of companies, based in the west coast of Norway, set up in about the 1920s by the Ullstein family. And we inherited the managing director, whose name was Ullstein, with the business. So very much a sort of privately owned family culture that's there. And of course, a family business can be run differently to a British PLC, as long as they're making acceptable returns. And they're serving the community, which is very important, providing employment and supporting the local community. They tend to be quite happy. A British PLC will take a different view. It will strive for ever-increasing profits. It will want to drive out inventory to keep working capital down. Those sorts of issues are not necessarily top of the list of priorities for a privately owned business. So you can see there some complexity and some differences between the businesses. And there was also a nervousness of Rolls-Royce, and this came through very much in the project, actually. A great nervousness of Rolls-Royce and a lack of trust, and a lot of that, I think, relates to the history. Some of it relates to the way that the acquisition was done and the way the integration was done or was not done. But if you look at the history just prior to Rolls-Royce taking over the business, some people in the business actually had 4 different owners in 18 months. The Ullstein Group had acquired a couple of companies. Vickers then acquired the Ullstein Group, and then within months Rolls-Royce acquired the Vickers-Ullstein Group. So, these people were confused, dazed. They didn't know what was going to happen next. Understandably, there was some anxiety about Rolls-Royce. And of course, they will have associated Rolls-Royce with all sorts of things, as well as quality. When you think Rolls-Royce, you may think expensive. They may have seen that as a threat to their business. You may think British bureaucracy. You may think all sorts of things. So generally there was a nervousness of Rolls-Royce. So for me, that's quite an important slide that illustrates that if you had tried to construct a business out of 2 very different businesses, then this is the way that you would have done it, I think, because it's quite startling, the differences between the businesses. However, I will later claim that there are some synergies as well, perversely. So I think in summary, we can look at there were all these different cultures. There was the Rolls-Royce culture, or you can read them for yourselves, I guess. And all of these different things were contributing to business integration difficulties. And we did want to integrate, because although there were differences, there were cross-selling opportunities. We wanted to have one face to the customer. We wanted to get a route to market for gas turbines. We wanted to share technology, share product knowledge and things. And there are lots of synergies that were there to be had. So we have, over a period, evolved an organization structure that helps to facilitate some of the integration benefits. And this is a slightly more detailed picture of my beautiful organization with the 2 customer-facing business units up there. This is the top-level organization chart. But as you dig beneath the surface, you very quickly find that it's not a classic CFBU, OBU matrix. It's actually a hybrid. We've got, and we don't really have time to go into the detail, but just to illustrate, we call, I could do with a box to stand on here. We call these the CFBUs up here, and these were the OBUs from the previous chart. But what we've also got, actually, is about 2,000 people in an operational unit within the commercial marine CFBU, and they are working with other OBUs, and they are looking to sell their products through naval marine over there. We've got the same over here with some operational units within the naval marine CFBU. We've got a global sales and service network that reports up through commercial marine, but which is also selling and servicing products in the naval market. And we've got the support operation within naval marine working very closely with that as well. Now, I could go on, but suffice to say, I think that there's quite a lot of complexity there. It's not a simple CFBU, OBU matrix. To be honest, given a free hand, if I were the boss, if I were the president of the business, I probably wouldn't organize it in this way. But we've taken a decision to do it in this way for all sorts of reasons, partly historical, partly regional issues, and we kind of stuck with it for the moment. At least that's the decision of the boss, until I can change his mind. So we have quite a complex situation, and so if you start to draw all these relationships out, you start to get into lots of squiggly lines that cross organizational, national boundaries. And that's what the matrix really looks like. So, kind of summary, I think, at this point, mainly for my benefit, I think. There are lots of products, lots of places that we operate in. We have a complex organization and a complex history. There are lots of complex relationships, and again, the history of the relationships is complex. some of our people were competing previously prior to some of the acquisitions that I talked about. And we've got these different national and business cultures. So here's my picture from earlier. Really what I think the organisation was telling us through pictures like this and through other means was that we needed to clarify roles and responsibilities. And we knew that this was the case. It was particularly apparent when we had a management conference in May 2002, where we took our top 70 executives away for a couple of days, when the number one business priority, I think surprisingly, even at that stage, was this: the need to clarify roles and responsibilities. Now, they also said we needed to sort out product quality and we needed to rationalize the product range. And we came out with 2 or 3 priorities, but the number one, by a significant margin, was the need to clarify roles and responsibilities. And that was the kind of generic term that we used to describe the issue that they were telling us that we had. But you might ask, well, what did they mean by that? Well, I think they were talking about the matrix issue. They were talking about the complexity of the CFBU, OBU structure. They were telling us, yes, it is simple at the top, but it gets very, very complicated the further you go down within the organisation. That it needs to be more integrated. However, we need to have license to operate. We need to be free to do our own thing to some extent. Particularly the Norwegians were saying this. They're quite independent people. So on the one hand, yeah, we want integration, but we want license to operate. So there are tensions around that. Yeah, the different cultures, we communicate differently, and everybody's got 3 bosses in this matrix. You've got a functional boss, you've got a regional boss, you've got a line boss as well. And in summary, I think they were saying that we just don't know how the organisation is supposed to work. That's really what they were saying. So we launched a project in September 2002. Now, it took us a little while to get from May, the conference, to September. And you might say, well, what took you so long? Well, frankly, we didn't know what to do. We came out with this priority to clarify roles and responsibilities, but we didn't really know what they meant, and we didn't really know how to address it. And we asked 2 of my colleagues to sponsor the project, the president of the commercial marine business and the president of the marine systems business. And I kept ringing them up and saying, so, what have you done? Where are we going with this? And they'd say, well, I don't know really. I don't really know what to do, and I haven't got any resource, and so on and so forth. And that's when I made the amazing leap that Eve referred to earlier. I'm not sure it was that amazing, but we decided to set up a project to address this. And we used a bunch of people from within the organisation together with the London School of Economics. And what we were trying to do was, first of all, to identify the issues, to understand the issues, and then to come up with an action plan to actually make things better within the organisation. And again, because I think this is the meat of the benefit, the value of the project, that's what we've come up with, 12 work streams. There are only 10, before anybody tells me, there are only 10 under those headings, but I had to trim it down to get it on one slide. But as you can see, we're looking at things like the account management process, product development process. We're actually developing training and support material for people working in the matrix to actually tell people for the first time ever how this organisation is supposed to work and the importance of relationships and building those relationships. We're doing specific things to facilitate informal networks and again build those relationships. We've developed and we're now piloting, in fact it's running this week in Helsinki in Finland, a marine leadership program for our middle to senior managers. And so it goes on. Our strategic process is being reviewed. And we've got a project underway to identify and drive out any remaining synergistic benefits resulting from the acquisition. So I would argue that quite a lot of those are fairly hard, business-oriented work streams that should have a significant impact on the bottom line. So you may ask, how did we get there? And it was the project that enabled us to do this. We had 21 people. 3 teams, split into 4 teams, 3 teams from Rolls-Royce and Rolls-Royce Marine. We have in Rolls-Royce something called an Accelerated Leadership Development Program, which is a bunch of bright, typically quite young people who are on a sort of fast-track route to the top. And so the idea was to get them involved and also to get the LSE complexity group involved in this project. So we had 21 people and the London School of Economics bringing the tools, the methodology and the academic rigour that I mentioned earlier. And we developed a project plan. There you are, the old sort of Gantt chart type of thing. And I suppose what this shows is the sort of time frame that we were operating in from September 2002 through to here, March 2003, when we were hoping to get the Marine Executive, that's my boss, the President, and my colleagues on the Marine Executive, to agree to a bunch of actions that we would put into the business. And what it also shows, I think, is over here, the sort of tools that we were using, and a little bit more about those in a moment. Now, we turned that overall project plan. Now, prepare yourselves for this because it's quite complicated. Quite a busy slide. I really do need a box to go through this one. It used to be a sort of slide that builds, but it takes about 40 minutes to get through it, so I decided to put it all up there at once, and I think you're all up to it, yeah. Okay, it starts over here with collection of data, works across the top, and then around here, back to ultimate implementation. So starting in the September, working through to March in terms of the time frame. Now the pink boxes are the other tools and techniques that the LSE complexity group brought to the party. The green box there on culture was something that we had already been working on. We had worked on culture at our conference in May. We'd done some cultural analysis, we'd done questionnaires, and we discussed those sorts of things in an attempt to dispel this myth of that national cultures were a problem. Then following on through the light blue bits up there were team reviews of the data that was collected, and we had group reviews. We ran a 2-day workshop, which was facilitated in brilliant style by Nazreen at the back there. Everybody look, wave. Brilliant facilitator. She used to charge, I don't know what it was, but anyway, it's about 50% more now, isn't it? I think. But seriously, it was a great event, very well facilitated, dealing with very complex issues, and we managed to come out of that, working through this kind of process that the LSE had helped us with, to identify the options, develop recommendations, and an action plan, and we then did things to confirm understanding. So we had reflecting back workshops, which is the expression that Eve uses, where we took what we were planning to do back to the group of people that we'd interviewed and the conference participants, and we said, we think this is the problem, we think this might help, what do you think? So we did all that good stuff, and we ended up getting the Marine Executive to approve it, and we've now implemented in the business, or we are implementing in the business. Now, a key aspect of this was the semi-structured interviews, which are up the top there, the interviews, semi-structured interviews with senior people. I've mentioned the 2-day workshop. Now, the semi-structured interviews, we actually interviewed in detail 44 of the 70 conference participants, and they were open questions. These were about an hour and a half, these interviews, I think, typically, from memory, yeah? And they were semi-structured, so the interviewers had some training and had some sort of notes to follow, and questions were about these areas that I've illustrated up there. And then each of the teams went away and did their analysis, identifying themes and tensions and so forth, and underlying assumptions. And then we had this 2-day workshop to decode what was said and to identify on a collective basis the themes and tensions and the underlying assumptions. So those were key parts of the process for us. Another tool that we used is something called Landscape of the Mind. Kate Hopkinson over there, who will now wave. There she is. This is Kate's tool or piece of technology. We used this as part of the project. This is an emailed questionnaire that went to all conference participants, and you get an insight into the inner skills of your population in very simple terms. I'm not going to talk in any more detail because there isn't time, but this was one of the main tools that helped us to dispel the myth that there was a significant difference between Nordics and Brits and Americans, because when you look at the inner skills that these people have and you put to one side the cultural differences, there isn't really a significant difference. So that was very helpful analysis from that perspective. as well as others. We're actually going to use this, this tool, this technique, in our Marine Leadership Program that I mentioned earlier, the one that's being piloted in Helsinki, because it's got significant potential for individual development as well. So that was a great tool, is a great tool. We also use something called NetMap. I put this up earlier. This is an example diagram. It's like one of those spirograph things. Those of you who, perhaps they still sell them, I don't know. Those of you who remember one or two nodding, yes. The grey hairs. This is an example from the pilot study of the sort of pattern analysis that is possible when you look at communication patterns. This is actually email traffic, plotting email traffic between different departments. Now, it's a very powerful piece of software, and we didn't really get very much benefit out of using it because we ran into technical issues because of the nature of our business. We have problems with confidentiality in the nuclear and the defense side of the business, which meant that it was hard for us to move quickly to do a full analysis of the business. So we ended up with a very incomplete picture. But I'm convinced that there is a lot of power in this tool to help you to analyze relationships and communication patterns, and the sort of things within our business that we had hoped to be able to get an insight into were to explore how much communication there is between the bits of the organization that we wanted to be communicating. So, for example, I mentioned earlier we wanted to sell gas turbines into commercial markets, into merchant markets. So how much communication is there between those parts of the business? If they're not communicating, then why? If they're not communicating, how can we expect there to be an exchange of market and customer information and product and technical information? So you could use this sort of analysis to give you a feel for the bits that are joined up and the bits that are not. So I think there's a lot of potential in that, but as I say, we didn't really get full benefit because of our... Yes, go ahead. It's my office. That's my office, yeah. I'm quite autocratic. Actually, I think that was the head office in Ulsteinvik in Norway. I think that's what it was. Now, the other thing, you can't draw any conclusions from this, but that's obviously an interesting thing. People will immediately focus on that. This was, I think, over just a relatively small period of 2 or 3 days. And I think it was at a time when they were looking at doing something with the financial systems, and there was a lot of email traffic that was coming out of the head office at that particular time. So you have to do the analysis sensibly over a period, but I'm convinced that... Well, it can do. This is reciprocated relationships, which means that something has been sent out and there's been a reply to it. But the power of the tool is immense, and there's all sorts of analysis that can be done. This is only one visual representation. You can do it in all sorts of different ways, which Professor John Galloway from which university in Australia? Sydney University. He's the man who's developed the tool. But immensely powerful, and it's been used not very much, I think, in organisation development activities. It's been used a lot in the retail trade, I think. Is that me? I just like to... Is it? Check your mobiles. There we are. It's been used quite a lot to identify security issues and fraud in the retail industry. I'm not quite sure how it does that, but that's been, I think, one of the main applications. So I think this was quite a novel application, and as I say, we didn't really explore it that fully. But if any of you would like to, I know through Eve you would be able to do that, and it's got tremendous power. So the current state of the project is that we have this action plan in place with the 12 work streams. We also have plans to do some future work with the LSE because we like them so much. They're such nice people and very cheap. And so we're going to do some work on agent-based modeling. We're thinking about doing some stuff that we're calling video stories, which was Melissa's idea at the back there. We're also looking to develop a community of managers, and we've got some actions that we're thinking about taking there. And the LSE is also building up some corporate links with Rolls-Royce generally, above and beyond the marine business. So that's what I've talked about. We did this project, it made a difference, and we're seeing some real business benefits. I hope I've explained what the issues were. I've given you a bit of background on Rolls-Royce Marine and a very quick project overview. I hope I've illustrated that we've got some real outcomes being implemented in the business. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much.